think we get a good chance to keep playing big games, because we need to do that if we want to be a big team and win titles with the women's team. So that's one thing that we show you guys, the fans, the opponents, that we are actually at Wembley too, because we are deserving that. I think to sign new players, we already showed this year that we can develop players and actually play some good football. But some of the players who want to come to Tottenham also want to win titles, so now we can hopefully show that as well, and that's a huge step for Tottenham Hotspur's women's team, I would say. And then also like for the fans, because they are supporting this team for so many years. We want to make sure that the women's football grow in Tottenham Hotspurs as well. And I think it's these kind of occasions when they come to the stadium and win with us that we can grow a fan base and hopefully make sure that we are a very strong women's team with the fan all behind us.
Welcome in to the Tottenham Depot. It is episode 174, and I am your host, Andrew. You can follow me at @Stedka. You can follow us at Tottenham Depot, and that was, of course, the voice of Robert Villaham, and the Spurs women are headed to Wembley. That is the big highlight of this week. I am joined by both Caroline and Scott for this one. We're coming to you a little bit later this week for reasons I'll get into, but start by throwing out to Caroline. She is at CG Stefko. Caroline, what an exciting time it is to be a fan of Tottenham Hotspur. Going to get to play for a trophy here in a few weeks.
We are. And, I'm feeling just very excited about that possibility that Spurs women could win a trophy in the first season under Robert Villaham. Like it's all happening. It just feels like this is kind of a magic of the cup kind of season. And we keep proving game after game that we can come back from setbacks. And I don't know, it's feeling really good.
It's quite awesome. It was an experience to watch it back. Scott is also with us at Scott G Bird. Scott, how are you, my friend? How are you feeling on this fine Monday?
Can't complain. We're, as you both have mentioned, we're in a cup final in the near future, and got to experience a semifinal over the weekend, which it's been a while on either side of the equation since we've been able to do that. So yeah, can't complain. I did unfortunately tear my calf muscle last week at soccer. We play a back three, and I'm the left wing back, and a little too much running for these old bones last week, and tore that calf muscle. But it gives me more time to play FIFA, so we'll make do.
FIFA, and I know we're gonna have to get an MLB The Show showdown going here soon.
We are
too, because I learned last week that you're an MLB The Show player, as am I. So we'll have to arrange that.
Triple A ball with the Cleveland Guardians right now. I'm the shortstop, and road to the show has me pretty absorbed at the moment. So.
All right. Well, before we put Caroline to sleep with discussion of baseball, and I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of golf thrown in, because yes, we are recording this late because I was lucky enough to attend my second Masters this weekend. So I told both Caroline and Scott, and this is for the listeners, I told them they're going to have to help row the boat a little more than usual this week, because I watched both of the matches, both the men's and women's matches, but watched them on delay. And honestly, it was not my main focus this weekend because I was traipsing around Augusta National Golf Club. And but we're going to start by talking about what is the obvious. Like, Spurs women did it again. And Caroline, you mentioned it, magic of the cup. Like, this was very reminiscent of all the other FA Cup matches. I mean, they've done it so many other times in terms of comeback style, in terms of wild goals, just in terms of thrills. And honestly, it was really, really awesome for me to know that this game was played in front of, what was that number? 18,078 people at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium got to witness Spurs in an FA Cup semifinal. They defeat Leicester City 2-1 after extra time on the goal from Martha Thomas in the 118th minute. Caroline, let's just start with you and your just kind of general reaction. I know we kind of have started on it already, but how are you feeling after all of this?
I think I'm just very proud of the team. And I mean the whole team, because this really felt like a whole team kind of effort. It just seems like we're taking every challenge as it comes and meeting it. And I think the really great thing about, this win not only that it, makes history for the women's team getting to a final for the first time, but also just that we did it playing our style and really stuck true to that. And I think that's what helped us to get the win in the end. But the other main thought that I have is just that I love to see players like Ash Neville, Jess Naz, Becky Spencer, Kit Graham, these players who have been with the club since the start of the WSL journey, that they're getting this moment to like show the world, what they can do, what kind of footballers they are. And, especially for all of them to have had really key parts in this victory. It just feels good. I feel like this is just a very feel good kind of day. And even today, I'm still kind of, on that high of the final whistle and just enjoying watching all the content come in from the dressing room celebrations and all the quotes. Like, just, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, the vibe I think is the best part of like getting this a little bit more than 24 hours later. We're doing this, and it's like it is kind of sweet, and also it's encouraging for me, Scott, because I feel like we've been talking about this all season, but this is the start of something. This is not the end of something. And the fact that the start of something is coming with an opportunity to play for silverware is really, really cool. And we're going to get a little bit more into the game here in a second, but I want to talk more about the vibe, because the vibe really is of a building block and a start of something special. And when you start these things out, it doesn't always come with these opportunities. And now that this opportunity is here, I just think it's really special and really cool for this club.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talk so much about the culture that's being built on the men's side, but the same thing's happening on the women's side, if not more so, with results on the field, right? I think Robert, he's building something really nice on the field, but off the field more so than anything, you're really seeing something start to take shape. I think there's been rotation in and amongst the squad as of late, right? But the passing patterns don't go anywhere. They're still there. Everybody's in the right position. Everybody understands the role, right? Regardless of who's deployed, which is, I think, one of the most important things when you're trying to build a culture, right? The plug and play ability of a squad. And they're playing freely. And that's all the atmosphere and the culture that Robert's creating. And there's no way we get to a cup final without that. There's no way we get past City, who had shelled us earlier in the season, right? Was it 7-0, I think, 6-0, something like that, right? To then go and beat them in a cup quarterfinal, that's culture right there. And then to go down in this match, which we'll get to, right? Fight back with a late equalizer and then end up scoring, a late winner of our own in extra time. That shows mentality and again, culture there. So, yeah, if anything's happening at Spurs right now, it's this women's team and what Robert's doing for sure.
The nature of the victory, you just kind of alluded to it there, falling down early, and there were chances galore for both teams. There was a lot of hard tackles for both teams. There was a lot going on throughout this match. You get a little slightly wider pitch, probably playing at the big stadium, a lot more room to operate, a lot more room to do things. I loved every minute of it. Caroline, what was your takeaway just from the actual game itself? Like I said, you fall down within the first 15 minutes and you've got to scratch and claw your way back to get that goal within the final 10 minutes from Jess Naz, which came on I think a hopeful ball from Beth England, but also a little bit of a mistake on the back line for Leicester. And for Jess Naz to get in there and take advantage of that. And then we'll get to the winner as well. But what did you make of just the nature of the way the game played out? It, like we said, it kind of felt almost reminiscent of so many other games this season for Spurs.
Yeah, I think for me, the big thing was just that it did feel like both teams deserved to be in the semifinal. We have to give a little bit of credit to Leicester, who they've had some challenges, off the pitch this season. But I think on the pitch, they're really showing a lot of improvement as well in their tactics and their style of play. So I think they were a worthy opponent, and we got to see a lot of really interesting sort of one-on-one individual battles. Like, for example, Ash Neville had a very tough assignment with Deanne Rose on that left wing for Leicester. But then, we had Jess Naz on our side, who was causing issues for their fullback. And we knew that Jutta Rantola, that scored the goal for Leicester, that she was going to be an issue. This is someone that, a couple of our players are really familiar with from playing with her at national level. And it was a great goal, a really great shot from Rantola.
It was remarkable.
And I don't think we can blame Becky for this one because she was a little bit unsighted. And it was just a great shot. So that's kind of the goal. You have to take it on the chin, be glad that it happened early so that we had time to get back into it. And I feel like I said before, we just had to be patient, play our game the way that we know we can play, and the goal was going to come. And I think we all would have liked to see some of those numerous chances in the first half go in, so it wasn't, quite as tense getting towards the end of the game when we did finally score. But yeah, I think it was great. And Robert's game management was a really big factor, I think, as well. Some of the subs that we saw come in the second half helped us to sort of just maintain that level that we had been playing at and eventually find the winner, or the equalizer, I should say. And you kind of alluded to the fact that it was a fortunate kind of goal in the sense that Josie Green, former Tottenham Hotspur player, made a big error in the defense for Leicester. But I think you still have to, credit Jess for showing the composure to get off such a high quality shot. Basically give the Leicester keeper no chance to save it. And, from there on, I feel like we just had to focus on taking control of that extra time period and not going to penalties again, even though I would back us to win in penalties because we do have Becky Spencer and we know what she's capable of now when it comes to shootouts. But yeah, I was really relieved that it didn't get to that point.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I don't want to take anything away from Jess Naz. The finish was pure. You have to be in that spot and be in that position, and the pass was there too from Beth. I want to double click. I want to go back to talking about Robert Villahamn for a second because we've talked a lot about Ange Postecoglou and the energy that he's brought and the just the transformation, not only in terms of on the pitch but off the pitch. I don't think enough credit. We've credited a lot of the players. We've credited Beth England, Martha Thomas, Clinton, Nat. Like we've named a number of the players that have helped to transform this club and get it to this spot. And look, this is a cup. Weird things happen in a cup. Teams can make runs. We're not saying that Spurs are on the verge of winning the WSL because they're certainly not. There's certainly room to grow, but these are the kinds of moments and runs that a team can make that I think are not only spurred on by the players, and look, credit to the club in general too for adding the depth with some of these players. I mean, to be able to bring players like Martha Thomas off the bench, like Charlie Grant, like Vinberg, like to be able to bring these types of players off the bench in a cup semifinal and use Robert Villaham's ability to, as you say, manage a game, all really, really important. But I think not enough is said about the job that he's doing in terms of, like you said, creating that culture and that winning mentality, and knowing that while Spurs are not yet on the level of Chelsea or Manchester City or Arsenal or Manchester United, they're growing to that point. They're showing the ability to play with these teams, have already, vanquished some of them this year. Not only in the cup, but obviously beating Arsenal in the league earlier this year. They'll get another crack at United in the final at Wembley here in May. I think there's a lot to be said about the way that he has taken this program and already put it firmly as we're next. We're next to break into this new class. And we've kind of talked a lot about, women's football in England and how there's been a big 3 or 4 and who else can tend to crack in. I think Villahamn has come in and made it so that Spurs are that team. It's not going to be Leicester. It's not going to be, I don't even really think it's going to be Liverpool at this point. I think it's Spurs. I think Spurs the next team to take that leap, and they're showing it with this run, and they're showing it with the way that they've played really throughout the season, and not only the way that they've played, but the way that they've improved. And I think a lot of that credit goes to Robert Villaham and the job that he has done this season with this team?
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. And, just before we hopped on to record, I was reading the really nice article in The Athletic from Charlotte Harper about sort of the aftermath of the game. And she got a quote from Martha Thomas where she talked about how, she had gotten to the final with United last season, and that was their first time in a final. But she said it means so much more to her this season getting there with Tottenham because of the group. Like everybody, it just feels like he's gotten everybody to completely buy in to the vision of what we want the team to be and to kind of feel that ambition and actually believe that things are possible with this squad that we have. And, kind of like in that quote from the beginning of the show, he's developed players. He's bringing along those players who have been here already and have been waiting for their breakout moment, like a Jess Naz, for example. It does feel like he's transforming the team culture. And the thing that I appreciate about him, I think, is just that he's very humble about it. Like he even admitted he was not expecting us to get to the final. Like that was not a concrete target for him this season. For him, it was more about just making sure the team was improving and developing and getting closer to where we want to be. But at the same time, he doesn't shy away from the dreaming, to dare is to do. Like he loves to use that quote, the team motto, and I love that about him. So yeah, I think we wouldn't be having this cup run if it weren't for his leadership, for sure. And also Beth England's leadership as captain, I think, as ever, deserves a huge shout. She's just been incredible in that role this season. And, obviously she was signed before Robert Villaham came into the team. So I've been saying this week, like that's kind of Rianne Skinner's legacy for the club, is that she was able to sign Beth England, and it was a transformational signing basically. So yeah, it's like we've got the foundation now, I think, to really go on and do good things and just keep building.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one thing that, I keep thinking about with him is throughout the process of finding a new manager for the women's team, we heard nothing. Nobody knew what was going on at all. I certainly had no idea who Robert Villaham was, and won't ever pretend I won't ever pretend as if I did. But his first interview really resonated with me, and he talked a lot about how for his two daughters, I believe two daughters, he felt that it was so important for him to invest all of himself into the growth and betterment of the women's game. He was in the men's game, and thank you, Caroline corrects me appropriately. One daughter and one son, right? And they're twins. So his two children are a daughter and a son that are twins. And I think he even talks about, actually, now that you say that in this interview, how he was somewhat involved in his son's team as well, and kind of had an idea or a view to how both sides of the game were taking shape, right? And he recognized that the women's game needed to be propped up and elevated, and he really invested himself early in his career in again the betterment and growth of the women's game, which I think is so important to the decision that was made. And I don't know if that was one of the key points of employment that we were looking for in a manager, or we just got lucky and stumbled across that, right? But either way, I think that mentality is so important, because when you're passionate about something beyond the sport itself, you're going to invest even that much more of yourself into the efforts, right? So all credit, again, as you both said, and we could go on and on about Robert Villaham. I think if you look at that match yesterday, like I talked about earlier, the plug and play and the ability to recognize the task and the responsibility and execute, it was evident from the jump. I don't know what the XG is, nor will I ever show interest in figuring that out, right? But if there's any of you XG lovers out there that want to let us know on one of these various social media platforms, please do. Or Andrew could even just Google it, right? The Google machine in front of us. But ultimately, we looked really good, right? We were creating chances. Celine Bazette had a chance early on that probably should have been taken. I believe Beth did as well. But in no way, shape, or form were we scraping and begging for an equalizer late in the game after we had created nothing, right? That the result definitely fits the performance, in my opinion. And to be able to go out and perform so well on the front foot in the semifinal of a major domestic cup. Caroline, you already mentioned, I think some of that is on Beth, right? And her ability to just put the team on her back yesterday, excuse me, in a big moment and get it done. But as we've already said over and over, Robert Villaham deserves, 90% of anything good that happened yesterday, because he had the team well prepared.
Caroline, I know you guys recorded a new episode of the N17 Women's Podcast, which I'm sure will be out very shortly, earlier today. So for anyone who wants even more in depth on this game and just the women's team, be sure to head over there when you're done listening to the Depot. But I did want to bring this up from MKP, who's watching us live on YouTube, which, by the way, you can do as well. A really good point here, I think, talking about how Robert has been able to implement playing both Beth England and Martha Thomas at the same time this season, and that's been a growth over the last handful, really since Beth England came back from the injury, like about midway through the season. It's been something that has been necessary, but also a little trying at times, because neither has even really fit perfectly like into that number 9 role. At times they've been playing back a little further or wider. It's been a lot of mix and match. What have you seen with that specifically, the flexibility to get these players to do different things and not just be a striker? Because we saw Martha Thomas just be a striker when Beth in England was out early in the season. It worked really well. But since Beth has come back, there's been a little bit of growth, and obviously it's working with whatever he's figured out. What have you seen with that specifically?
Yeah, I mean, when Beth first came back into the team, I think that, frankly, it wasn't working very well having them both on the pitch at the same time. And I think part of that was just lack of chemistry from not having played together, earlier in the season. But I think the big thing has been that it's not just those two who are being asked to be kind of flexible and, switch between different roles within a game. Like, everybody on the team has done that. Everyone has been expected to play very fluidly. I know Martha was joking about playing right back at the end of this game. And that's kind of an extreme example, but it is true that, they're expected to be moving around the pitch, keeping things nimble. And so I think that the players now have this expectation that maybe the role that they start out with in the game is not going to be how they finish it. So in this one, for example, we saw Beth started at striker, ended up moving back into the 10, and obviously was able to get, it wasn't credited as an assist, but essentially was an assist. So, she can play in that more of a playmaker role and make it work. And even Martha, had some time at striker, but then when all the substitutions were said and done, she actually moved out to the right wing, which she has been open about the fact that she did not like playing at that position at United. And that was kind of her frustration at that club. And part of her motivation in moving to Spurs was she wanted to be, playing at striker. But I think that really speaks to the effect that Robert has had on the team of getting that full buy-in from players and trusting the system, trusting that we're going to make it work. And with that, we've had, I think, some really great performances from Jess at striker this season, where traditionally we think of her as more of a winger. But, she's been able to adapt her game. So it's not just sort of this adaptation over the entire season, but also within games that I think has really been crucial. And it makes it difficult for opponents to know what to expect from us as well, because we hadn't really seen Martha play winger for Spurs, and that was not something that Leicester was going to be prepared for. So, it ended up working out in this game, and I think we're going to continue to see that no matter, there's lots of question marks about the transfer window this summer, who's going to stay, who's going to go. But I think this is going to be kind of a trademark of Robert Villaham's Spurs team, sort of the interchangeability of roles and, the flexibility.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Spurs will get an opportunity to see what they're going to see in the FA Cup final, because it's Manchester United next on the schedule for them in WSL play. That comes up this Sunday. That'll be interesting. It's it's a little bit like playing Leicester a few weeks before this semifinal. They got that job done, won that game 1-0, and then turned around and beat them 2-1 in the semifinal. Maybe they can turn around and beat United in the WSL. They lost the last match 4-0. It's obviously a step up in competition, but it will be really fun, I think, and interesting to see. Not to mention the Spurs are still kind of trying to scratch and claw and see if they can claw their way to 5th or maybe even 4th in the table. Currently sitting in 6th, but only 5 games remaining in the WSL season, plus of course that final. So it will be really fun to watch, and we'll get some more action this weekend. Of course, the other big kind of note, because they're playing United, there will be no Grace in the final. She's not going to be able to play because she's obviously tied to them as a loanee, but God, I just hope we sign her permanently. Honestly, that would be. I know Dakota was on social media calling for that, and Caroline, with what you're saying, with how much she's enjoyed her time at Spurs, you would think maybe both parties could be interested in a move, but I don't know. I would love for it to happen, but we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because she's been very like candid about the fact that she's fully supporting Spurs in this final, and if we're going off of what she's putting out there, she wants to stay at the club. And obviously we're getting some prize money for being in this final, so there's really no excuse not to make it happen unless it's just Manchester United being stubborn. So
not only that, but the club in general is just in a really good financial position. You maybe reward some people for these things. Like we've talked about that ad nauseum over the last few weeks about just FFP and all of that nonsense on the men's side, but Spurs are free and clear and raking it in, and obviously get another really nice gate. I mentioned there were, 18,000 people in the building yesterday for an FA Cup semi. Like continue to produce, and these are the things that happen for a club. When good things happen, it starts to snowball and roll in that way. So Spurs get to take on Manchester United Sunday, and we will we'll be able to recap that one on next weekend's pod, and it'll be a nice little preview for the final, which comes up at Wembley on May 12th. So something to look forward to. Do we want to slowly transition to something that none of us are looking forward to discussing? And that is Newcastle United just doing kind of what they did last season to Spurs up at St. James Park and just annihilating them. 4-0 was the score on Saturday, lunchtime fixture. I don't even think it was as close as 4-0, to be perfectly honest. I think it easily could have been another 5-6 goal romp. Scott, let's start with you, my friend. What the hell? I guess is the only question I have. Why did this go so poorly for Spurs?
Oh, I could talk for the next couple of hours if you'd like me to. But no, it's a tough performance to digest. I would start by saying easily the worst performance under Ange Postecoglou since he came to the club, right? But I really think it was just a perfect storm of things going in the wrong direction. First of all, the midfield is still in shambles. The play of Basuma is causing problems without question. We have a hard time doing anything with our possession. And as I talk about all the time, when we're possessing the ball, we're at risk every single time, especially when we possess the ball in our opponent's half. We're always at risk. We know that. That's a system, right? But when you don't do anything with all that possession, you really cause problems. And as we all know, you have to score goals in the system to win, and you have to score quite a few of them, right? That's not happening at all. And then third and most importantly, the on-ball defending was really poor at the back, which we have never seen since this team took shape. In this system, when your midfield is poor, and let me pause on the midfield for a second. I think the biggest issue is I don't think we have the technical players, the amount of technical players required for the system right now. I think Bentaker is technical enough with the ball. Madison's technical enough with the ball, and I think that's about it. I think it honestly reminds me of the days under Pochettino where we really only had Dembele and Eriksson from a technical perspective, and we just couldn't break through a low block because of it. It's honestly apples to apples to that period in time. But with Bentaker and Madison and having really no one else that's technical enough to thrive in this system, it puts a lot of strain on the front three, right? But ultimately, when you can't score goals, your midfield is not technical enough, and your defenders are not defending well on the ball, you're just going to have a bad time, as they say. And I think that's exactly what happened.
It is really jarring to look at, just basic borderline statistics and see that Newcastle had 27% of the possession in this match and scored 4 goals. That's really telling because, like you said, Scott, when you're not doing anything with your possession and you're quickly giving up goals when you give it up, that's what leads to a scoreline like this. Caroline, I think that Postecoglou made it pretty clear after the match that there wasn't one position group or one player to blame for this. It was really collective, and that's kind of the way I felt too. Is there anyone you want to single out or dig out in particular, or do you kind of feel like it was just a 11 players not really doing their job type of effort as well?
Yeah, I honestly think it is just one of those days when the entire team was off of it. Like it's really hard to even single out a single player that played well. And usually there's at least some sort of, silver lining to be found. And I really struggled with it in this game. I don't know. It's just jarring to see some of like our top performers on this season playing that poorly. Like if you look at someone like Mickey Van de Ven, Pedro Porro, people that we've come to think of as very reliable. And I'm not digging them out like on a personal level by any means. Like I said, I think the whole team played badly. But I think that just kind of like emphasizes that we were not set up for success in this day. And like Ange has always been very honest about the fact that he's more concerned about outscoring our opponents than keeping clean sheets. But you have games like this where it feels like we could play for 2 more hours and still not score a goal. Like that's not necessarily something that you can come back from. And I feel like unlike the women's team this weekend, the men's team did not have the sort of mentality factor working to their advantage. It did feel a little bit like once that first goal went in, the defense just crumbled. And I don't know. I'll be honest, I've kind of just tried to forget most of this game. So that's pretty much all I've got.
Yeah, no,
But
it's fair because it is one of those that you just kind of throw away. Scott, you mentioned that it's the worst performance of the end Postecoglou, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I think Fulham from a few weeks ago comes to mind as well as being really, really poor. Both matches on the road. I think Fulham I don't know. Is Fulham less than Newcastle? They're probably pretty similar in terms of their levels right now. Maybe you could flip them on any given day, but for me, Ange's mentality and his tactics do deserve a little bit of a skewing in this, because if you don't have the types, and this speaks to exactly what you were talking about earlier, if you don't have the players that are good on the ball, that are going to be good one-on-one defending, or just going to have an off day, like Caroline says, Van de Ven, Porro, and of course Porro came off injured, which we're gonna have to talk about as well. But if you're having a bad day at the office, something probably does have to change. You can't just always go gas only. You have to have a little bit of break, or else you'll skid the car off the road, right?
Great analogy. Yeah, I agree. I also think that there's a bigger picture at play here, and I appreciate the comment from the listener there. I think it's a question that many people have been asking, or a point that many people have been voicing, right? But And before I even get to that, I will also say I myself have been questioning the tactics for a couple of months now, right? I've been just moaning and groaning on and on and on about how offensively we're not doing anything, right? But ultimately, there's a bigger picture at play here, and we can first look to Ange coming in and saying there's going to be some really rocky moments and points in time this first season, right? I think yesterday or Sunday, yes, yeah, Saturday rather, was one of those glaring rocky points that he had warned us about, right? Because Ange has got to be the first to see that the tactics are not working right now. I think we came we came out hot, and I really think we caught the league off guard a little bit, and nobody understood how to play against these, just kind of wild tactics that Postecoglou deploys. But as I've talked about quite a bit, I think the league's caught up to that a little bit. I think Fulham and Newcastle, for example, great examples of what a team can do if you're just well prepared to execute transitions against our team. All you got to do is watch one match. You'll see exactly where you'll have opportunities to exploit transitions, and then you prepare yourself to exploit those transitions adequately, and you'll probably beat us if we're not scoring goals, right? Which we're not. So it all compounds. But I do think the league's catching up a little bit. But what I think is happening here is and recognizing all this for sure and saying nothing is going to change, because right now the points are not the priority. The progression of the style of play and the project is the priority. If the points are the priority, then you do make tactical adjustments at halftime, right? And you say this isn't working, and you do everything required to get 3 points. And I would call that a band-aid, right? You throw a band-aid on the situation, you veer away from the project and the goal, and you do what's required to get the 3 points. But right now the priority is the growth of the project and the progression of the system, right? So and isn't going to change anything. And I think that's exactly why he warned us that there would be some really rough days at the office, because he knows in the back of his head there's going to be days where my tactics get beat, but nothing's going to change, right? I'm not going to adjust.
I almost get the feeling at times that Ange Postecoglou would be completely comfortable with this team not making the Champions League. And that's not to say that he doesn't want to make the Champions League, because who wouldn't? It's the Champions League. Everybody wants to make the Champions League. But when you kind of read between the lines a little bit, some of the comments he's made, he's not even thinking about top four. That one was a few weeks ago. And kind of to what you're speaking of. No, this is the way that we're going to learn to play. And this might honestly, if you take a step back, and maybe I'm just speaking completely out of my ass here, but when you take a step back and think about this as a year one thing, he's just going to have the players that he has, and he's going to try and get them to play the number one way that he wants to play. And I hear all this talk about Ange needs to have a plan B. He needs to have a plan B and have a plan C. Hell, you want stats? Spurs produced 0.77 XG in this game. So yeah, they're not producing in the way that Ange Ball did early in the year. And they're also giving up a ton of goals in transition and on counterattacks, and things are going awry. Maybe deep down, he's kind of okay with that, because he knows that this is year one of a thing that he's trying to grow, and he's going to get them to play in this way. And then once he can get another window and get some different types of players in here, get a little bit more depth in certain positions, such as the fullbacks, such as the center backs. Like, I really do think that it's not like this guy doesn't know that he needs a plan B. It's just that he's not really that worried about coming up with one right now, because he's just trying to get through the rest of the season and see where the chips fall. And I think that can be really frustrating for fans, and it should be really frustrating for fans. But at the same time, if I look at it as, oh, this guy just has a long-term plan and he's not really that worried about the short-term goal right now that a lot of people think he should be worried about, I'm actually a little bit okay with that if I take it with all the grains of salt and look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, it's well said, because I think fans have every right to be frustrated, right? Champions League is important to a lot of people. Points right now are important to be able to achieve that. But Ange came out and said Champions League is not his goal, right? That he has higher ambitions than just working to get fourth place, right? And honestly, as a fan, I'm right there with him. I'm tired of chasing fourth place. and having that being some grandiose ceiling that we're looking to achieve as a club. I'm really tired of it. I want to chase winning the league. I'm done with chasing fourth place, right, as a fan, and I think that's exactly what Ange is representing from the top.
Did we lose?
And I also love what he says. Did you lose me? Damn, I was on
just
a
for
heater
a
too.
second. Just for a second, you're back. Go ahead, bud.
Yeah. Not quite sure what the last thing anybody heard was. Can you edit this out and tell me where I was?
You can just continue to rip, my friend. You're good.
Yeah. What was I even saying now? Well, we're live. We're live for the listeners.
You're fine. You're fine. I'll pick you up. And Ange is building this thing, and like just the perspective of, yeah, we would love to have Champions League, but if this is being presented as he's setting a foundation to then go after the league next year, and obviously, you know, maybe even winning a Europa League or something, or being competitive in Europe, like having European competition for me in any way, shape, or form after this season, that should absolutely be the goal. And especially when you look at it's 6 games left and Spurs are comfortably sitting in 5th. They're 10 points clear of Newcastle. They are 10 points clear of Manchester United. Like, yeah, you definitely are going to have European football. It's just a matter of whether or not it's going to be Champions League football. It's whether or not it's going to be a 5th place Champions League football with the coefficient. And we don't need to get into all that. Like, there's a lot to be decided over these last 6 games. But for me, if it's Champions League, that's great. That's almost a bonus, because honestly, if you would have told most fans at the start of the season, and I know this expectations have to fluctuate and change, but if you tell most fans this team's going to be a 4th place Champions League team or even a 5th place Champions League team at the start of the season, they are not only excited by that, but they're probably shocked by that. Because if you go back and look, a lot of people had us finishing 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere in that range, to be perfectly honest. So like all of this to say, if Ange is taking a longer view of this, I get it. I'm not gonna hoot and holler about it, because this has been a positive step for this club.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing also worth mentioning here is Ange came out in a press conference and explained that players who wanted Champions League, he wasn't really interested in that type of profile, right? And I think it just kind of omits the argument that we have to have more dollars to be able to sign the type of player we want, so we got to get Champions League. Doesn't really work like that under Postecoglou. And so I think we have an opportunity with a manager who is lockstep with this mentality of we need more than Champions League to actually go and compete for something. So me personally, whether we get 4th or 5th place, I honestly do not care, right? Europa League is great. I would love for us to make a run at that thing under Ange Postecoglou. I think we could, right? So, but it's all about the long term project here, that, as we've talked about quite a bit, right? So to tie it all back to the result, it was a shit result. Doesn't feel good, doesn't taste good, but I really don't think it's that big of a deal, and certainly not any reason to sound any alarms or pump any brakes or anything like that.
Caroline, where are you on this? Because I feel like I don't want us to come on the podcast every week after we lose and be like, well, but it's about the long term, and then come on after we win and be like, well, let's go get Champions League. Like, that's not fair either, right? But at the same time, we're trying to have like a practical, you know, somewhat practical conversation about all of this. Where do you see this long term versus short term combo?
Well, I think that it can be tempting to think that it's contradictory to say we shouldn't be focused on 4th place this season. We should be thinking about a title charge next season. Like, I realize that does sound kind of crazy, but I think that when teams get into this habit of making 4th place their goal, it kind of incentivizes playing a really safe brand of football, like we saw under Conte, like we saw under Mourinho. Like it's from the financial perspective too. It just puts like a weird pressure on the team, on the manager, and on the players. And I honestly, I think we might have seen a little bit of that in this game and the result and how it played out, you know, because I think that the players, as much as they have kind of tried to buy into the Ange project. We have one of the vice captains, Madison, coming out after the game and saying, like, yeah, we do care about getting fourth place. So kind of directly contradicting what the manager's saying, what we're supposed to be thinking that the club is focused on, which is the long term. So that's interesting, and we'll see how that plays out. But I think if I was going to have sort of a complaint about the recent results and the recent performances, it's not for me so much that I want a change in tactics from Ange. I think I want to see a little bit better game management. That's really been the sticking point for me, because I think we've had a couple of games where he acted very decisively with halftime substitutions. And those were the games that we did well in and won, because he actually recognized that there were players on the pitch who weren't performing and, gave someone else a chance. And I think he's not really sticking to the long-term vision, in the sense that there are some players who I feel like are kind of getting left behind at the moment. If you look at someone like Lo Celso, who I think when he's come into games has had good performances, and he's not getting rewarded with a start. And on the flip side of that, someone like Basuma, who's putting in poor performance after poor performance and not having any consequences to it. So that for me has been the frustration of late, not so much the tactics, which I think we have to commit to if we want to play this style long term, because we know that there are going to be players coming in the transfer window who are going to enable us to play it better. Like, we had to be patient in the meantime with the players that we do have. And I know, Scott, you were speaking to the fact that the technical skills are not there all across the pitch necessarily at the moment. So I don't know. It's something where also as fans, we have to be patient too. But I do think there are things that Ange could do to sort of, mitigate some of these like short-term issues that we're having. And I think with a game like Arsenal coming up, he has to recognize that the fan base is not going to be content in this specific game to, kind of brush off like the desire to win. Like, this is a game where we want to see 3 points, and it's not even about like how we do it, it's that we get it done. You know what I mean?
I think part of the other issue that you're speaking to there is, not punish is the wrong word, but not keeping players accountable for poor play. It's tough to do when you don't have like a direct replacement for them. Like, it's really hard to pull Destiny Udogie off the pitch when you don't have another left back, a true left back that plays in the way that he does, to come on. You really don't even have it when a guy like Porro goes off, but you at least have Emerson Royale who can come on and do something out there. It's tough when you don't have like for like players. You don't have the depth quite there. There's a lot of issues that I still have with all of the lack of depth, which I think can be fixed or at least helped in another window. I mean, we always have to keep reminding ourselves it's been 2 windows, and so many of the players that are still playing for this man are not players that he brought in. So I think that's another big part of this too, Scott.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. First, I want to double click on what Caroline said about the Arsenal match. I completely agree. I think you do whatever is required in that match for the points. It's the one time where I'm comfortable saying, like, fuck your plan. We need points in this match, right? Go to Greece for a week and enjoy yourself, and let somebody else run the week. I don't care, right? But we need to get the points against Arsenal. But I think there's also a lot to what you're saying, Andrew, and we talked about this a lot in the build-up to this season, right? Without Europe, we're out of both cups. I said at one point, keep rolling the same 11 every single week and let them play through it. Let them bed in. There's a lot to be said for letting the same 11 just continue to play through the challenges, right? I 100% think that's the case. I'm also ready to see Lo Celso get a start over Madison. I'm also ready to see PEH get a start over Basuma, right? So these are things that can both be true at the same time. And I also think if I'm Ange, and he sees the guys every day in training, right? So I think more from the fan perspective, but if I'm Ange, I'm curious to see what Lo Celso can do as I approach the next transfer window, because with Lasoso, it's time to get in or get out, dude. Like this whole back and forth thing with him, and a lot of it's injury related, right? But if I'm Ange, I want to test Lasoso with a start or two, see what he's capable of, so I can make the right decision as we go forward. Because we're 2 Ange windows in now. I think we can comfortably say 4, 5, 6 maybe required for this project that we're looking to undergo, right? With the way that we spend and the way that we stay within the financial laws of the game. So it's all coming, and I think ultimately I don't have an issue with Ange just rolling the team out every week and telling them to play through it either. So
The really funny slash, I guess, ironic thing about everything that went down this weekend, which I was kind of out of the loop, didn't have my phone on me for much of the weekend, wasn't really paying much attention, but the fact that Aston Villa do leap us for fourth and move 3 points ahead while we do still have the game in hand, but they do so at the expense of Arsenal, which is also kind of like, all right, I'm good with that. Like, that's cool. That's funny. Like, I can have a haha about that. I'm down. But there is a lot of that going on too. And as I look at the table too, we're talking about a title challenge for next year, which I think can sound absurd to a lot of people. Like, oh, Spurs are going to challenge for the title next year. Give me a break. But you don't realize that Spurs are 13 points off the top of the table. And while 13 points sounds like a lot, that's a couple of wins and turning a couple of defeats into draws. That's what that is. Like, it's a handful of matches that have gone the wrong way that you flip on their head. And with another window of depth and with hopefully some differences in style of play, that's, I think, when I talk about Ange's tactics, I think what I mean is you cannot go out against a different opponent every week and play the same type of game. You have to adapt a little bit to your opponent, no matter what the case, whether it's Fulham or Newcastle, whether it's Arsenal or City. Like, it doesn't matter to me. You have to know that they have certain players that are going to try and do certain things to you. You have certain players that's what coaching's all about to me. And the tactical part for me is just not running. It's doing the exact opposite of what you're talking about, Scott. And for this year, like you say, I'm fine. Run the same 11 players out there. You're not having to play a ton of games. You're playing once a week. Although, as we'll talk about, that's also going to change over the next handful of weeks. But you could do that this season. You could do the run 11 players out there and play the same way and ram your head into that wall all you want. Going forward, when I talk about Ange and tactics, I do want to see a little bit different things happen, just because I think it's going to be necessary to adapt to opponents especially as opponents learn your tendencies. Like, we talk about this a lot in baseball, and Caroline, if you'll pardon the baseball talk for another second, but and honestly, for our European listeners too, who don't follow baseball, but a pitcher goes out every game and he faces the 9 players in the lineup. And then the lineup turns over and they get to see him a second time. And then if the pitcher's still pitching later in the game, they get to see him a third time. Well, the same thing is happening right now with Ange Postecoglou. All these Premier League teams are getting to see him for a second time this season as we play reverse fixtures. Early next season, they're going to get to see him a third time. So they're going to get more familiar with what he is doing and therefore be able to adjust to it. He's got to adjust back. And I'm not saying he's got to change the way he plays. You can still have free-flowing attacking football, but there's got to be some tweaks here and there to avoid what we saw on Saturday, which was a debacle. And I'm going to stop short of calling it an embarrassment, but you get that kind of result again at St. James Park next year, 3 straight of those, that's going to be an embarrassment. That's really, really bad. It's got to be better than that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree, but I think with a guy like Ange and the way he deploys his team, I think the variation more so comes from the different subtle differences, I should say, the subtle differences in your personnel, right? And we just don't have the depth to be able to deploy those subtle differences, because I think his system is very rigid in our own half and the middle third. But once you possess the ball in the final third, it's kind of just go play, which I really like. I think is important in soccer. I think the more you handcuff a player in this day and age, the worse they do. Look at Roma under De Rossi now that they've sacked Mourinho, right? The ability to go and play soccer is an important thing in the current game. And Ange really tells the team to go do that in the final third. But as I said, we just don't have the technical personnel to be able to do much of that. So I think as transfer windows go on, two, three more windows, I think you're going to see a lot more of that differentiation that you're asking for just in the personnel itself. I also start to have thoughts like, next year Premier League run. And then I'm like, maybe not, but the third year for sure, we're going all after it. But then I'm like, oh, then Son's 33, is almost 34 years old. Like someone else has to be starting for him, right? So like, it's also kind of go time next year too, with the personnel that we have, but we've got to add some depth to it to be able to achieve exactly what you're talking about, I think, Andrew.
Well, speaking to the Sun thing, we have to win a trophy before he retires. Like, I'm sorry, find a way, make it happen.
Yes.
But I was going to say exactly the same thing, Scott. It's one thing to say that we want Ange to be a little more flexible with personnel and his squad selection, but we also have to recognize there have been many times this season where he just doesn't have a whole lot of variables to work with. Like even in this past game, you got a team that doesn't want to possess the ball like Newcastle, that we are going to have to try to work through a really bedded in defense. And we didn't have a player like Richarlison who could come in and be that sort of target man. Like that was the reality of the game. I think Sonny kind of struggled in this game for that reason, but we just have to work through it the best we can and wait for the transfer window, essentially.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, Europe will be nice. We don't know what's going to happen with the fourth versus fifth thing. That's out of Spurs' hand, obviously. But the focus is on 6 games. And unfortunately for Spurs, it's 6 games crammed into a smaller time period because of what's happening around them. It's a 2-week break now. They don't play again until the 28th against Arsenal. That's the North London derby. That's the home leg. Spurs don't get another 7-day break in the season from here on out. They have it now. You got a week off, really more like 2 weeks off before that. And then it is 6 games in well less than a month. You got Arsenal. Following Thursday, you play away to Chelsea. That's where they stuck that one. Then you go up to Anfield the following Sunday on May 5th. Then you come back home. You play Burnley on the Saturday, the 11th. Then turn around Tuesday. That's where they have now stuck the Manchester City game. And then you close the season the following Sunday on the 19th of May away to Sheffield United. So I don't really love that the final home game is on a Tuesday night, but that's where they put the City game. And then, of course, the team's going to fly to Australia right after that and go play that meaningless friendly against this Newcastle team that they just, completely embarrassed themselves in front of. But it's these 6 matches. That's all that we have in front of us in order to try to make 4th. And of course, it's one more game than Villa play, so you do have that advantage. But that's kind of where we're at this point with just trying to do it. So it's a tough run in. It's a really tough run in. There's 3 home, 3 away, but those first 3 especially, and then the City game behind it. I mean, I'm not saying Burnley and Sheffield United are going to be easy matches by any stretch, but because they never are, because we're talking about Tottenham Hotspur. But when you have to play Arsenal, Liverpool, City, the 3 teams that are competing for the title in your final 6 games, and then you've got to throw in a game against Chelsea, and Chelsea were playing today. And if I saw correctly, Chelsea won 6-0 today at home against Everton, which is that's a thing that happened. I don't really know if I have a lot else to say about that, but that's a thing that happened. It's not great. How before we get out of here, are we feeling apprehensive about this run in, or do we not really like? I'm fine either way with however this goes. I would like them to show well. I don't think they're going to fall completely on their face, but boy, with a Pedro Porro injury, with some of the performances we've seen, with some players looking for some reason extremely knackered, I don't know. I don't know how I feel, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm less than confident in our ability to finish above Villa. but I'm also not too bothered about it, as I've mentioned earlier in the show. So no mystery as to why, but I don't think we have it in us to get the points required to finish above Villa. We just do not look good in any way, shape, or form, unfortunately. But I do think we finished fifth, and that's really because teams underneath us are poor and are not picking up points either, right? So I think we're safe enough to find enough points to get fifth place, but I wouldn't be surprised if Villa finishes 4 or 5 points in front of us when this whole thing's said and done.
They do have a fairly difficult run in as well, though, and they're also still involved in the Europa Conference League. So I mean, I think they're very focused on that. So that it could be that neither of us pick up particularly many points in this, last few games, and maybe our positions change, maybe it doesn't. But yeah, I don't know. The Chelsea game is starting to concern me just because you never know what team is showing up. Is it their like incompetent clown show, or is it Cole Palmer scoring a hat trick? I don't know. But since that's our game in hand, it is kind of an important game at this point. So yeah, I don't know. Looking at the schedule makes me feel a little nauseated right now. But I'm also just really focused on the women's team winning that final. So who even cares?
Yeah, I was
right?
gonna say I was just gonna say we're not ending the pod on this note. Spurs are going to Wembley. That's something to look forward to. I'm excited about that as well. So we're gonna leave it there. Thanks to the listeners for bearing with us on a slightly later pod this week. As I said, nothing I could do about being out of town this weekend. Got to take advantage of those those big trips when you can. So I was doing that this weekend, and told these other guys we'd get to a pod. It would just be a little bit late. So thanks to the listeners for bearing with us. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube page for those of us, for those of you who want to watch the video and comment during. And be sure to leave us a rating and review on your podcast app of choice as well. That really does help to spread the word about the show, and tell a friend as well. For Scott, he is at Scott G. Bird, Caroline at CG Stefko. I am at A Stetka, and follow us at Tottenham Depot on all your social media platforms. We'll talk to you next week following that Spurs women match against Manchester United. It'll be a nice little preview ahead of the final next month. We'll talk to you after then. This has been the Tottenham Depot podcast. As always, come on, you Spurs.